Yes, please proceed, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise on a matter of personal and collective privilege. For the 5th time, the Philippines has received the Dirty Ashtray Award. The reason is we were blocking global tobacco control efforts. When I say we, it is a great embarrassment to me, Your Honor, that the representatives for us, for the Philippines, stood before a global audience of mostly health advocates, and they advocated for the tobacco industry, Mr. President. Global Alliance for Tobacco Control again awarded the notorious Dirty Ashtray to the Philippine delegation on the last day of the 10th session of the Conference of Parties, otherwise known as COP10, to the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, otherwise known as WHO FCTC, held in Panama City from February 5 to 10. The FCTC is a treaty negotiated under the auspices of the World Health Organization, created in response to the tobacco epidemic. The treaty has 168 signatories and 180 parties, including the Philippines. The Philippines ratified the FCTC on February 22, 2005. According to the WHO, the FCTC provides a global response to the global tobacco epidemic. It described the FCTC as an evidence-based treaty that reaffirms all people's right to the highest standard of health. Regular sessions of the COP are held every 2 years. The Philippine delegation this year was given the Dirty Ashtray Award for its brazen use of tobacco industry tactics to dispute and delay throughout COP10. According to the Southeast Asia Tobacco Control Alliance, otherwise known as SIATCA, after almost 3 days of deliberation, parties failed to achieve consensus to establish an expert group to facilitate implementation of FCTC Article 9 and 10 on the regulation and disclosure of the contents and emission of tobacco products, with the Philippines joining a minority of parties blocking consensus. What is Article 9 and Article 10? Article 9 deals with the testing and measuring of the content and emission of tobacco products and their regulation. My dear colleagues, mga kababayan, sino ba may ayaw na itest at sukatin ang laman ng tobacco products? Bakit ayaw? Bakit ayaw ipatest? Ano ba laman nun na ayaw ipaalam sa atin? Bakit naman tayo may delegation na hinaharang ang information na makakasakit sa ating mga kabataan? Hinaharang dahil meron silang nilalagay doon na alam nilang nakakasama sa kabataan. Imagine, gano'n na nga ginagawa nila, dirty tactics, sinuportahan pa ng gobyernong to. Sinama pa sila at sinuportahan pa ang ganitong mga pangyayari. Nakakahiya, Mr. President. Now, what is Article 10? Article 10 deals with the disclosure of information on such content and emission to government authorities and the public. Disclosure of information. Ang nais lang naman ipaglaban ng health advocates is kayong mga tobacco product sellers, distributors, tobacco companies, legal naman ang pagbebenta nyo. Pinayagan naman kayo magbenta sa aming bansa. Pero you must conform to regulation. You must disclose kung ano yung laman ng mga produkto nyo para ma-regulate naman kayo. Dahil kung hindi kayo ma-regulate, paano naman ang mga kabataan? Paano naman din ang may edad na na-addict? Dahil nga may mga laman yan na nakaka-addict at nakakasama sa katawan. Why in the world would we send a delegation that would prevent full disclosure of harmful ingredients in tobacco products, including vapes and e-cigs? Why? Because we do not have the political will to fight against these tobacco companies. Nakakahiya. It's bad enough that these tobacco companies are allowed to get away with it, but it is even worse and unacceptable that sinasamahan pa sila, inimbita pa na sumama dito sa conference na to. Ang sumasama dapat sa conference na to, health advocates. Kung gusto naman ng tobacco companies na fair lang ang turing sa kanila, makapagbenta sila, nakakapagbenta naman sila eh. Regulation lang ang gusto natin. And sinamahan pa sila, holding hands pa sila ng ating mga government officials to attend this international conference. I have no words, Mr. President. It is an embarrassment. According to the reports, the Philippines proposed a compromise option that further muddled the discussion and caused more delays. My God, my Lord, bakit ba kayo pinanganak at nagdala pa kayo ng ganyang tao sa isang health conference na manggugulo lang? With no more time left to continue deliberations, the agenda item was deferred to COP11. Every delay is a win for the tobacco companies. Every delay is on the hands of our government officials who allowed it, who held hands with these people and allowed it and are probably cheering na na-accomplish nila yan. Babalik ko, anong na-accomplish nila? Ginulo nila yung mga debates para yung simpleng requirement na ilista nila at isubmit nila yung ingredients na laman ng kanilang produkto, ibibigay nila, hindi nila magawa, nanggulo pa sila. Dinelay pa nila, dinamay pa nila yung buong mundo. Nakakahiya, Mr. President. Former Health Secretaries Alexander Padilla and Esperanza Cabral have said that this is alarming and that the Philippine delegation should take this dishonor as a wake-up call. Hindi lang wake-up call, Mr. President, ikulong na yung mga taong yan. Budget pa tayo ng budget, our chairman of the Committee on Health is here. Budget pa tayo ng budget, debate pa tayo ng debate na increase yung budget ng healthcare. But on the other hand, sabay-sabay sumasakay ng eroplano at nag-a-attend ng health conference para guluhin yung health conference na yan at para i-dilute yung mga provisions na makakapagbigay lang naman ng information sa ating lahat. O kaya tuloy maraming naniniwala, nakakabuti sa kanilang vape. Kasi hindi naman binibigyan ng public, hindi pinapaalam sa public kung ano yung laman yan. At ito, harap-harapan na ipaglalaban nila na itago yung information. 11 former health and education officials have urged the Philippine representatives to the COP10 of the WHO FCTC to take a stand against e-cigarettes or vapes amidst an increase in its use among the Filipino youth. Dr. Jaime Galvestan, DOH Secretary 1995, Dr. Carmencita Riodica, 2001 to 2005, Dr. Esperanza Cabral, DSWD Secretary 2005 to 2009, and DOH Secretary 2010, Dr. Pauline Rosel Ubial, DOH Secretary 2016 to 2017, Attorney Alexander Padilla, DOH Undersecretary 2001 to 2009, Dr. Susan Mercado, DOH Undersecretary 1998 to 2001, Dr. Madeline Valeria, DOH Undersecretary 2012 to 2013, and former Education Department officials, Brother Armin Luistro, DepEd Secretary 2010 to 2016, and Attorney Alberto Muyop, DepEd Undersecretary 2010 to 2016. I can only speak also for former Secretary Liling Briones because she had made statements about this in the past when I handled the budget of DepEd budget. The Philippines received its Dirty Ashtray Award at COP4 in 2010. But at least it was redeemed the next year, and they received an Orchid Award at COP5 when it excluded tobacco industry representatives from its delegation. Yun lang, Mr. President. Bakit ka naman magdadala ng delegation ng industriyang nire-regulate doon? Bakit? Dalhin nyo sa trade conference, walang problema. Pero ba't mo dadalhin sa isang health conference tapos magpapadikta ka? Yan ang ginagawa po natin, Mr. President. Nakakahiya. At COP9 in 2021, the Philippines was given 3 Dirty Ashtray Awards. These awards are given to companies and governments seen as peddlers of tobacco industry interests. So the Philippines is a peddler of tobacco industry interests. Nagtaka pa ba tayo? Why would we allow it? Wala tayong ginawa kundi ipaglaban ng ating mga kababayan, ipaglaban ng mga kabataan. But we allow government officials to do this right before our very eyes. Based on studies collated by the Inquirer, the vape law that was supposed to curb tobacco smoking among adults and the youth is instead leading to a spike in the use of the so-called alternatives, which experts said were as harmful, if not more harmful, than tobacco. In-depth research is showing that the law is insufficient and leading to a failure to adequately defer some tobacco and related products from ending up in the hands of young people. This flaw is fueling a growing trend of smoking and vape addiction among Filipino youth. And it is now coined as the vape-epidemic, or the widespread use of vape. A study published online in the National Library of Medicine summarized some of the warning and worries aired by vape law critics in the past years. The law, the researchers said, not only legitimizes the use of vaping products, but also lowered the age at which these can be accessed. The vape law allowed access to tobacco, vapes, and e-cigarettes to 18 years old, when we had already passed a law pegging the age at 21. Despite regulations, a separate study by the Institute for Global Tobacco Control at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Health found ongoing sales and advertising of tobacco products near many schools in the Philippines. There is ample evidence showing that tobacco companies employ various strategies to promote their products, aiming to attract the attention of children and young individuals. Renowned Filipino tobacco control advocate and Southeast Asia Tobacco Control Alliance Executive Director Dr. Ulysses Doroteo had described the then vape bill as a retrogressive bill in more ways than one. I will repeat, Mr. President, the vape law, RA 11900, overturned 3 protective measures that this representation fought for in the sin tax law, RA 11487. The jurisdiction to regulate vapes and HTPs was transferred from FDA to DTI. Lowered the minimum age of access from 21 to 18 years old and allowed more flavors instead of limiting it to plain tobacco and plain menthol. Mr. President, may I ask that we show again the slide? Historically, these industries even used doctors, or at least actors that looked like doctors, to somehow promote that some cigarettes are healthier than others. This was done, if I'm not mistaken, in the 1950s and in the 1960s. And time and again, Mr. President, I kept on saying that same lang naman ang playbook nila. They will still use, whether it's doctors, meron pang dentista, nagsasalita pa sila sa mga conference na patago, pero nalalaman naman natin, kino-convince ang mga ibang professional na mag-shift sa vape. Hindi dapat nag-shift, dapat wag nang manigarilyo at wag din mag-vape. The tobacco industry is slimy, to say the least. They have a track record of avoiding regulation all over the world. In 2009, we passed the FDA law, which intended to cover all tobacco products and other products that have an effect on health. The industry filed a TRO on FDA. The industry filed the TRO and FDA when FDA issued regulations covering tobaccos. We actually won this case, Mr. President, after some 10 years. The Supreme Court ruled that tobacco products affect health and therefore is under the jurisdiction of FDA. But of course, nag-motion for reconsideration pa ang mga tobacco companies kasi ayaw na ayaw nila magpa-regulate. Hindi ko po kinakampihan ng FDA, marami din pagkukulang ng FDA, but they do have the jurisdiction to regulate. Sila lang ang may ability. Kung gusto natin galingan nila, it's either palitan natin yung head para mas magaling or bigyan natin ng pondo para mas magawa yung trabaho. But you cannot just give this jurisdiction to DTI, which is what we did, Mr. President. Mr. President, we have a public duty to protect public health. The loss of lives is immeasurable. The young people that may not reach their full potential because they die of tobacco and tobacco-related products, which includes vape and e-cigs, is real. We must aim to make better legislation which prepares us for the future, and we must aim to make these people who are passing on fake and downright incorrect information and doing it in public, protecting the tobacco companies, they must be held liable, Mr. President. For the record, these are the COP10 delegation. Senior Deputy Executive Secretary Hubert Guevara from the Office of the President led the largest government delegation at COP10 with more than 30 officials and staff. Wow. Wow. Malaman ko nga kung ano yung budget na pinadala sa WHO because in May, Mr. President, and I was a delegate to the WHO World Health Assembly, not at the expense of the Senate or the government, if I may be clear about it, but I was sponsored by WHO itself to talk about the fight that many of you have joined me with against this tobacco company. So now, may 30 na pumunta doon. 30 na ginastusan pa na makarating doon. Congress Representative Rodante Marcoleta and his staff, representative from the Presidential Legislative Liaison Office, Department of Agriculture, National Tobacco Administration, Department of Trade and Industry, Department of Foreign Affairs, Department of Health, Department of Education, Department of the Interior and Local Government, Food and Drug Administration. In my humble opinion, Mr. President, talagang ang dapat mag-attend yan, Department of Health and Department of Education. Kasi yan ang nangangalaga ng kalusugan natin and kapakanan ng kabataan natin. Sila okay. Kung may isang dadating from the Office of the President, wala naman ho akong problema. Pero among these people, kasama pa ho dyan ang mga tobacco industry representatives. The Philippines sent the largest government delegation to COP10. Wow! Wow! Ganun ba tayo kayaman? Ganun ba kaimportante sa atin na pagtakpan at tulungan ang tobacco industry na kailangan pang samahan ng 30 government officials? Kaya pala magkakasakit na at mamamatay na yung kabataan natin because we don't care. We send our government officials to protect the tobacco industry. Madami pa akong pwedeng sabihin, Mr. President, but I think I've said the most important issues. Sadly, the Philippines has received this Ashtray Award, 30 Ashtray Award, and 2 years in a row na. Ano to, buong administration? 6 years? Yun na lang ba paghahandaan ko? I would have actually attended, Mr. President, because I wanted to have a voice. But the way it works is the head of delegation is the only one who can speak. And you know very well, Mr. President, they will not make me the head of delegation because I will never support the tobacco industry. So I hope, my dear colleagues, you can continue to support those of us who have been standing firmly to protect our youth against the evils of the tobacco industry. Thank you, Mr. President.
Before I recognize the majority leader, I just want to say, put on record, I salute the advocacy of our distinguished colleague, Senator Pia Cayetano, and in the right time, later, actually the timing is perfect because you are the chairperson of the Blue Ribbon Committee. You have the power in your rules of your distinguished committee who was in the past investigated malfeasance, misfeasance, and non-feasance, even corruption on even bribery, together with illegal lobbying, etc., etc. You have that power to investigate all these people. And at the right proper time, we're going to send your privilege speech to your committee, and I hope you can bring him hell. Because really, there is a vape pandemic. You're absolutely correct. And with the permission, of course, of the majority floor leader, I don't want to do his job because it's his job. We could include the Committee on Health, and after the investigation, after the possible charges that you can file, if there is any possible violation of law, you can also come up with recommendations to amend the existing laws that we have, including the vape law, and improve on it from what we had passed the last time.
Thank you.
And you'll have our support. Thank you, Madam Pia.
Thank you, Mr. President.
If I may, Mr. President, I would just like to, first of all, congratulate our dear colleague for raising this alarming violations of the Vaporized Nicotine Regulation Act, which prompted, actually, Mr. President, our body, our institution, the Senate, to adopt an unnumbered resolution. I remember to address it head-on. As Senator Pia had been espousing these particular initiatives that we have to look into in addressing this alarming problem. Mr. President, I would just like to put on record that I could not help but express this representation's frustration, Mr. President, not just as a legislator, Mr. President, but as parents, Mr. President. May mga anak po tayo at kung naalala nyo, Ginoong Pangulo, na bahala po tayong lahat nung ipinakita sa atin ni Senator Pia Cayetano dito sa bulwagang ito, yung iba't ibang flavor at makukulay na packaging na vape na naglipa na, lalong-lalo na sa online shopping sites. Isang tahasan po ito kasing paglabag doon sa ipinasang batas at nagdadala ng panganib talaga sa kapakanan ng at kalusugan ng ating mga kababayan, lalong-lalo na ng ating mga kabataan. At Mr. President, ngayong buwan nga po, nakakalungkot po na marinig natin na sa ikalimang pagkakataon, ikalimang pagkakataon, nagawaran ng Global Alliance for Tobacco Control ang Pilipinas ng Dirty Ashtray Award. Napakasakit po na isipin na parang baka yung word na kulang o sobrang kulang ang ginagawa ay hindi makatarungan, Mr. President. Although this should not in any way, Mr. President, reduce or diminish the efforts being made by the government and the previous Congresses in addressing tobacco control and related health issues. So may I just ask one question, two questions, Mr. President, just to clarify, Mr. President, and humbly submit this to your honors. Dahil I believe this is a wake-up call for all of us in the government to do better, Mr. President. And so my only question is, how many people or in the daily average, Mr. President, if the distinguished lady would have the data, daily average death in the Philippines due to tobacco-related diseases? And siguro matanong na rin natin, does tobacco use have a hand in the leading causes of deaths in the country, Mr. President?
Mr. President, my staff is looking up the number for the death and serious health effect of tobacco on people, whether it's worldwide or nationwide. But I have something else to say in addition to that. So WHO estimates that more than 8 million people die prematurely yearly from tobacco use.
Wow.
This is the latest available WHO estimates as of November 2023. I'm not sure if we have Philippine data.
Mr. President, 8 million, did I hear it right? 8 million?
Yes, worldwide, Mr. President. Worldwide, just to be clear.
President,
And then I have a local, sorry,
Opo.
would you like me to continue first with the local
Yes,
numbers?
please.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So tobacco was the highest risk factor driving the most deaths and disabilities combined in 2019. I repeat, the highest risk factor. In other words, it's not obesity. It's not having a particular condition. Nakadagdag ang tobacco use sa mga death and disability data that we have. It was estimated that tobacco use accounted for more than 112,000 deaths, or 27% of all deaths in the Philippines.
Wow.
Of tobacco deaths, 96,000 or 85% were attributed to smoking, and 22,000 or 19% were second-hand smoking. So when a member of the family, and usually it's a parent, is smoking, pwede hong magkaroon ng lung disease or a tobacco-related disease or problem ang mga anak, or even an elderly living in that family kahit siya mismo ay hindi naninigarilyo. And if His Honor would recall, I would often recount my own experience as a pregnant young lawyer forced to attend board meetings among a smoking group, and nobody even bothered to ask, "Are you okay? Do you mind?" But thankfully, we passed that law. Hindi pa ho tayo Senator, Majority Floor Leader, and even the presiding officer and our Senate President when the law was passed prohibiting indoor smoking. So at least we can honestly protect the younger generation of women who are pregnant, and for that matter, kahit hindi naman women. And remember, these are just reported cases. Paano pa yung mga nasa probinsya sa mga malalayong lugar na hindi na na-autopsy or hindi na nakarating sa ospital? I'm sure marami pa yon, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I can associate with that, Mr. President, because growing up, mayroong assessment sa akin nung bata po ako na asthmatic po ako, Mr. President, and I'm really allergic to smoke, Mr. President. Even until now, kahit dito sa Senado, pag may nakikita ko talagang ini-insist ko talaga yung karapatan ko na makalanghap ng fresh air at hindi sumama yung aking pakiramdam. I just like to point out, Mr. President, yung na-encounter natin na isang artikulo dito sa Lung Center of the Philippines. Itong 2022 alone, may daily average death of 321 due to tobacco-related diseases. And then nakalagay din po dito, tobacco kills more than 8 million people worldwide, as mentioned by our distinguished colleague. Pero yung isang tinitignan ko po dito, yung leading causes of most deaths in the Philippines, ay itong, I don't know how to pronounce this, ischemic heart disease, IHD, ranking first, stroke, ranking second, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, COPD, ranking 9. So for said diseases, tobacco was responsible for 30,000 or 33% of total IHD deaths, 17,000 or 25% of all stroke deaths, and 14,000 or 83% of all COP deaths. Natandaan ko lang, Ginoong Pangulo, nung time na nagkakaroon tayo ng pagdinig, and this representation was part of that hearing conducted by our dear colleague. I remember what the Philippine College of Chest Physicians shared during that vape hearing, Your Honors. Mr. President, sabi po, because it was equal parts sad and shocking, they shared that among traditional smokers, cases of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease are usually seen at the age of 50 and above. However, the youngest patient with COPD among vape users was a 16-year-old girl who had to be intubated because of ramp-up use of vape just within a period of 6 months, Your Honor.
Yes.
So,
yes.
this is really alarming, Mr. President. And as I mentioned a while ago, yung mga pinapakita niyo po sa bulwagang ito, sino ba ang hindi makakakuha ng atensyon pag ganito yung mga idinadanggel sa ating mga kabataan, Mr. President? I mean, we have kids, we have loved ones na nakakakita po nito, and maaaring sila ang susunod na mabiktima.
Yes, Mr. President. And if I may give a short response to the Majority Floor Leader's the data that he shared with us, yung mga iba-ibang sakit na binanggit nyo na nakakamatay, hindi ho ba yan kadalasan that is those people who are afflicted are those people who come to us to also ask for financial assistance, medical assistance, and then pagdating ng budget hearing, and our former chairman of the Committee on Health is now the presiding officer, Senator J.V. Ejercito, we always insert more access to healthcare, whether it's funding for the hospitals, funding for the medication. Nilalagay ho natin lahat yan doon, di ba? Pati if you think about it, cancer meds, I'm assuming, di kasama din dyan ang lung cancer. So, ang gusto ko nga, Mr. President, itong lahat ng agencies na to na walang kinalaman sa proteksyon ng health, and unless they can prove to me that they stood up there to support further protecting the health of the Filipino youth, sa kanila ko tatanggalin yung budget na yon mula ngayon. Yung budget ng Department of Agriculture, sige, I will wait to see the transcripts kung ano itinulong nila sa health at nag-attend pa sila ng conference na to. Si Department of Trade and Industry, sige, ano tinulong mo sa health? Kasi tatanggalin ko talaga sa budget niyo yun dahil hindi na nga kayo nakatulong, nakasira pa kayo. Lalo nyo pang pinalala ang problema dito.
Mr. President, I share the sentiment of our dear colleague. I can see where she's coming from. I wanted to put on record that I fully support her advocacy. As much as I wanted to ask more questions, Mr. President, but please allow me one more, just give us an update, Mr. President, yung update on the discussions from last year's hearing, particularly on the issue of regulation. I remember it was a heated debate whether or not it is really the Department of Trade and Industry and not the Food and Drug Administration who would head the or be at the helm of having that regulatory powers, Mr. President, in this particular case, Your Honor.
Mr. President, the sad reality is the vape law, which amended the sin tax law, governs, no? And so this law basically gives DTI the jurisdiction over tobacco-related products, including vape. And so, Mr. President, it would be the DTI who would give permits to all of these companies that are either retailing or distributing these companies. And now, when DTI holds the hand of the tobacco industry and goes to a conference that is trying to strengthen health measure, and we have reports that sumama pa sila dun sa grupo na ayaw mapasa yung Article 9 and 10, which is really just requiring that i-report ng mga tobacco and vape companies yung laman nung vape products nila. Well then, I think DTI has gone way beyond the jurisdiction that that weak law gave them. The weak law said that you can regulate. I am not happy with it, pero sige, be my guest, regulate it. O tapos nakipag-holding hands kayo, sinamahan nyo pa yung tobacco industry para ipigilan yung information na kailangan mailabas sa publiko para the public knows, para yung mga parents alam nila na ito yung nilalanghap ng anak mo o isang nagmamahal na nanay, pwede niyang sabihin sa kanyang partner, Valentine's pa man din ngayon, na huwag kang lumipat dyan sa vapes na yan kasi ito pala yung mga produkto niya, nakakasama. Nag-abala si DTI. Sige nga, patingin, meron kayong ginawang ganon? So that's where we are, Mr. President. But I also have to report that we have a few measures that we are, I think some of them have been filed, but there are a few more that we really want to take up so that we can strengthen it. Sadly, I don't know how this will prosper. I'm pretty sure, I trust that I have the Senate support, but beyond the Senate, hindi ko na po alam kung makukuha natin yung support the support that the Filipino people need so we can protect their health, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think it's important to note that this is the Philippines. Hindi po ito ibang bansa na lahat pwede, lahat kung anong mapagtripan, basta gagawa na lang ng desisyon. And I stand my ground, Mr. President, and put again into the records my position, this representation's position. From the very first time, Mr. President, we tackled this particular issue, even last Congress, that the Food and Drug Administration should regulate vape and heated tobacco products. Number two, the age requirement should have remained at 21 years old in compliance with RA 11467, which introduced amendments to the sin tax law. And I also recall my proposal, Mr. President, that in the event that there are concrete findings, and the records from this August chamber will bail me out, if there are concrete findings supporting the dangers to health of heated tobacco products, the Senate must timely enact corrective measures. It's here in this August chamber's records, and I will say it again, I stand by my position, and I stand beside Senator Pia Cayetano in espousing these very important initiatives in ensuring the safety of our people, most especially our young people whom we consider the hope of this nation. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, Majority Floor Leader, for your questions that allow us to spread into the record the gravity of this situation, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, Mr. President, I move that we refer the privileged speech of Senator Pia Cayetano and the manifestations and the interpellations thereon to the committees on accountability of public officers and investigations and health and demography. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there objection? There being none, so referred.
Mr. President, this juncture, I move that we transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders, Committee Report number 161 on Senate Bill number 2474. This is the bill on PNP Forensic DNA Database Act. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2474 under Committee Report number 161 and ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure.